Let me introduce him. This is Marlon Mowdy. When we discovered that he was been appointed the curator of the Wolf House, David and I actually went down there and spoke with him and met him and talked to him about coming and do this presentation. I know a lot of us have been very curious about what's going to happen with the Wolf House. There's been a movement for years to try to get it to be open, to be available to the public. So I'm very pleased to introduce Marlon Mowdy.
Thank you.
I'm going to adjust these lights and you try to decide. We can take them all the way down. This is the lowest setting.
That's good. That's great. That's great. Okay, thank you. A couple of months ago, got to visit, I think, with David and Jennifer, and I'm the new kid on the block, so everybody wants to know who I am and what the heck's going on, and I'm going to share that with you tonight. Briefly, I work for the Department of Arkansas Heritage, the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, an agency under the Department of Arkansas Heritage. And in March of this year, we acquired the Jacob Wolf House historic site from the Baxter County Quorum Court. So for about a period of 6 weeks, I worked with Judge Pendergrass, and the transition between Baxter County and our agency. I want to make mention of the folks with Baxter County, Judge Pendergrass's office, people with the city of Norfork, and citizens such as yourself that's been involved perhaps at some level over the past 30 or 40 years with the preservation, promotion, and protection of the Wolf House. You should give yourself an applause because preceding us, you've done a great job. The communities around here have done a great job in keeping the Wolf House going. We were able to acquire the property. We have the resources and personnel where we're going to move the property forward. In tonight's program, we're going to take a look exactly what is the future of the past. I have a historical narrative I'm going to share with you. A lot of you are familiar with the Jacob Wolf story. Some of you may not be. So I'm going to give you an overview of Jacob Wolf and the highlights of the things that took place there. And then the latter part of the program, we'll get into specifics about what we're going to be doing over the next 2 to 3 years with new site development, restoration work to the historic structures, and first-time public programming. So a little bit about my background. I've worked for the state of Arkansas 22 years. My first 17 years was with Arkansas State Parks. I was a park superintendent and helped manage natural, cultural, and historical properties and interpret those resources to the public. The last 3.5 to 4 years, I worked for the Education Division with Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. And my wife is just from up the road, Thayer, Missouri. Okay, Mammoth Springs State Park is where I first started as the assistant superintendent many years ago. And so I was visiting with some folks earlier here, and a gentleman asked me, are you from around here? And I said, no, but I grew up in an area just like Baxter County. I grew up in a very remote, very rural mountainous area in southeastern Oklahoma, the Kiamishi Mountains, about 40 miles west of Mena, Arkansas. So the mountains and the rivers and the lakes and how we do things in the mountains is something that I've been accustomed to for a long time, and it's a real joy after spending 10 years, the last 10 years I've been in southeastern Arkansas, which is beautiful in its own right, but when I got an opportunity to apply for this position, it was a coming home of sorts because we had solely intended to retire here in this area 10 years from now. We got here 10 years early, so how good is that, right? So we're really happy to be here in the Mountain Home area. And I'm ecstatic about having the opportunity to help move the Jacob Wolf House historic site forward. The early frontier is one of my favorite types of properties to manage and interpret. It's one of my favorite periods of history. My very favorite movie, just so this will all come full circle, is Robert Redford and Jeremiah Johnson. How many have seen Jeremiah Johnson? Robert Redford and Jeremiah Johnson. Okay. If I could go back in time and live another life, it would be right there in the mountains with Robert Redford and Will Geer and in that movie. I might not have lived past the age of 50, but it'd have been a heck of a ride. You know what I mean? All right. So, without further ado, and I hope I don't mess this slide advancer up, let's visit a little bit about Jacob Wolf and his journey to this area. He was the grand architect, as most of you know, of what happened there. Okay.
You already messed it up.
It's not advancing, David. Have you left me? David's gone.
No,
Oh, there he
right
is.
here. Just use the arrow key, I think, is the best, next best thing to do. But give that to me and I'll see if I can figure out what's going on. Might just be a weak use.
I can use.
Well, the mouse. The mouse is wireless.
Okay.
Sure.
Great. Okay. Modern technology.
Still not advancing, huh?
Tired.
Let's try this. Let me see if I can. No.
You may want to escape it and reload it. It's something not, it's stuck or something.
Yeah. It's stuck.
That might be froze.
Let me try this for you. This is still not operating. And the arrow key is operating it now?
No.
It was on the bottom.
Oh. Sorry about that.
It was advancing with you
Yeah,
a while ago, was it not?
It was working, but probably all the other stuff I did interfered with it.
Your cursor is way up on the top.
I can't sing or dance, so just bear with us.
Just give us a minute.
David, sometimes if you'll touch the second slide, it'll go ahead and move
There's your
to.
cursor.
Now, we had a screen open there that didn't need to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's get some of these other things closed here.
Close down. All of them closed down.
Now, yours should be the only one, even it's not here, but let's pull it open again.
Okay.
Now, I did that with the arrow there, but this probably won't work here.
All right, so Jacob was a pioneer, territorial legislator, county official, businessman, military or militia officer, postmaster, and community leader. And in 1829, he established the first territorial courthouse in Izard County. It still stands today as the oldest public structure in Arkansas. Folk architecture of that site. Jacob chose the Izard County Courthouse to be a two-story dog trot style structure. The style of structure was common for territorial public buildings. We believe he brought this idea with him when he was in Hopkins County, Kentucky. He dabbled in politics there. There was a similar two-story dog trot territorial courthouse in Kentucky. We believe he brought that design with him. The size of the log structure, approximately 2,500 square feet, was perfect for large crowds. Court sessions served the needs of business ventures that he was directly involved in and associated with the structure. Now, the vernacular structure, the folk architecture, that's a description that's used for someone like Jacob and his sons, who he also taught to be a master log builders. They had certain styles. The Dutch had a certain style of building log structures here in the United States. German immigrants had a certain style. Jacob was born in Pennsylvania in 1786. He was of German descent, and this is the style he brought with him. It's a very commanding, compelling presence, standing up on top of the hill overlooking the White River, and he intended it to be that as such. So on the south end here, this is the south end chimney. The chimneys have been rebuilt about 3 times over the last 200 years. That last chimney on the north and south side was built, we believe, around 1870, 1880, out of limestone. What's different about the south chimney, Neil? What do you see there that's different?
2 colors.
2 colors, 2 different types of material, right? The bottom is stone, the top is what? Brick, okay? One of the things that, and when you visit the Wolf House or you go on one of our tours, there are some tiny subtle hints in the timbers, the log structures. Some of the timbers are dressed, or that have a fine line of beading, as they call it, down on the bottom of the floor joist or the ceiling joist. Also, it brings about a certain level of prominence and formality. Just those little subtle hints to let the visitor know it's an important public structure. Jacob also wanted to bring about, after knowing of the Davidsonville courthouse over on the Black River near Pocahontas State Park there today, that interprets the same time period as we do. It was made of brick. How fancy is that? Here in farther west in the Ozarks, he built a structure to stand the test of time, and I think we know that he's done quite a good job. He built the first chimneys out of brick, and those were produced locally, okay? So when the last chimney was built, they took what remains of the original bricks that were in place and added it to the top of the south chimney, more or less to commemorate, Jacob's vision of what he wanted here to be a really commanding presence with the structure. Now, the log timbers, they were made of pine, virgin pine in the river valley. The half dovetail notching is in place. Limestone mortar daubing that goes over the chinking. The chinking is a process where in between the timbers, in the case of the Wolf House, you have some small white oak wood slats about this wide and about that long and about that thick. They're layered in there, beveled in there at about 30 degrees. And that limestone mortar, that daubing, is mixed with horsehair. And it is applied in here over the wooden slats, and it adheres to that and dries, and it stays in place. And then this is the north end. And then the front of the building faced west towards the river. Turkey feathering. That's an architectural style. This is the west side of the building. Originally would have been white oak shingles. The restoration process that took place in the early 2000s used cedar shingles. The turkey feathering is an architectural style on the windward side of the building. The shingles are probably 12 to 15 inches above the crown of the roof. And that helps carry the wind and the elements up over the roof, keeping the structure dry. That's some of the folk architectural elements that's in place there at the Wolf House. Oh boy, here we go. Okay, so Jacob envisioned an upstart community at the juncture of the White and Norfork rivers. The newly formed Izard County needed a seat of justice, and this was accomplished at the 1829 territorial legislative session. The 2-story dog trot was actually planned 2 years prior to its approval in the legislature, proving that Jacob was a keen visionary in understanding what it would take to build a center for politics, river travel, and trade in an upstart community. I want to share a story with you about exactly what type of a keen visionary he was. Now, Jacob, he dabbled, he had his hand in many different cookie jars. This guy was an entrepreneur. Back in that day, he had a trading post when he first arrived. on the White River. He spent the first 2 years on the West Bank. There was a Cherokee land grant in place from the Treaty of 1817. The lands that were given up in the east were provided for the Cherokee here in Arkansas. The Delaware and Shawnee Indians were also lived there on the West Bank. He did very well those 2 years he was there. He's a master blacksmith, and he also was an entrepreneur with his trading post. 2 years later, he moves over on the east side. He petitions the U.S. government for the 76 acres of land he wanted to buy over there. Back during this time period, the federal government owned the property, the land. He petitioned for 76 acres, he got that, and he built his first home there. They arrived in this area around 1820, and he early on was elected a member of the territorial legislature representing Izard County. In his first home, not a dog trot, but his first home was built just north, and I mean just a few feet north of the territorial courthouse. Jacob authored a bill, and when he was at a legislative session in Little Rock, he authored a bill to request permission to build a new territorial courthouse. And the existing home that he was in, it was common practice back then, that court was held, which was about 2 to 3 times a year, in literally the front room of your home. And so he had a temporary seat of justice already in place. He got approval to build the new territorial courthouse, but he wanted to make sure it was a fair process, all right? It's got to go to the lowest bidder. Well, Jacob said, we need to make sure that it adjoins the existing courthouse. The existing courthouse was his house, okay? And it needs to go to the lowest bidder. I'll donate my 76 acres of land to build the territorial courthouse on. Obviously, Jacob became the lowest bidder. Pretty savvy, huh? It gets better. He put a reverter clause in the bill. In the event the population of Izard County grows, and I think he pretty much knew that it would, then it's going to be reverted back to the person in which built it or donated the land. Well, that would be Jacob. And that's exactly what happened, okay? So he had a store here. He had the territorial courthouse. When the court wasn't in session, and we'll get into that a little bit, it was an inn. So for about 25 cents, you could spend the night. If you didn't have money, you could barter and trade with him. River travel and trade. In 1829, there were no road systems here to speak of. You had the Southwest Trail coming out of Missouri down through what is today Pocahontas along the Black River, Davidsonville. By 1831, Jacob had authored another bill to get a spur built off of the Southwest Trail, which finally brought, which was later known as a military road, the Fort Smith to Jackson Road, through the north part of what is today Norfork. But the White River was the interstate of the day. It was the I-40 of the day. If you were moving into this area, if you and your family, as an example, was leaving the congested east, which a lot of people did, and you want to journey west and make a new start of things, you'd have traveled by keelboat or flatboat on the White River. Okay? You either did that by traveling the river or the river corridor, riding by horseback. You learned to trade and barter with the Native Americans that were in the river valley. The Cherokee, Shawnee, and Delaware numbered by about 3,000 during this time period. You would have traveled by keelboat or flatboat. Flatboats allowed you not only to haul your goods, and if you were somewhat affluent, maybe a few pieces of furniture, but also your livestock. They were perfect for that. And if you finally made it up to the juncture of the Norfork and the White River, you saw this really commanding presence of what was the territorial courthouse or inn, and you would stop over and perhaps stay a few days to get rested up. The territorial courthouse existed to serve the residents of not only Izard County, but it was a circuit court as well, which served folks from Izard, Lawrence, and Independence counties. The second story was the courtroom, nothing fancy, not the People's Court on TV, is it? Okay? Pretty humble, all right, but straightforward and practical. John P. Houston, downstairs in the South Pen, or the South Room, was the county clerk. He was there for almost the entirety that it was a courthouse from 1829 to 1835. And when court was in session, people from all over the countryside would come and gather on the grounds. They'd camp. The women folk would cook their favorite meals. They'd sell cakes and cookies. The kids would play their favorite games. The men would be involved in skills of competition, tomahawk throwing, black powder target shooting, and so forth and so on. So it would last about a week, and it was a big festive event. Court's in session. Let's all go. We'll see you there. And some of the cases that were tried throughout the Ozark region, throughout Arkansas, if you will, were primarily civil cases. There were cases that were tried that today we would consider them to be felony cases, but your most common cases are hearings, settling of debts, land disputes, stealing of livestock, assault and battery, those type of things. So the lawyers and the judge were traveling lawyers and judges. They would come from another circuit court in another area or county, or they'd come up from Little Rock. The defendant and plaintiff's lawyers would preside over their case up front. The judge sat up front. You had a jury of 3 to 5 men, and if you were the defendant, you would sit there in the middle, as an example. Now, life on the frontier. I was telling a lady a while ago, all of our interpretation of the sites is based upon historical fact. From our state archives, first-person accounts, we have a lot of letters that have been saved and preserved and protected over the years. And one of the letters describing the turn of events, the places, the people, the situations on the frontier in the Ozarks was E.B. Dickinson. He was a young man, of all places, and of all things to do, moved from Connecticut out here and ended up in Liberty, Arkansas. Okay? And we have letters of him writing his family, his mom and dad. He got out here in his mid-20s, telling them what it was like, how he learned to live off the land and be a mountain man, if you will. So 200 years ago, what do you think some of the things were like here in what was then Izard County? Living off the land or living off the frontier? What do you think some of the things that we dealt with back in those days? Anybody?
Lack of supplies.
Lack of supplies, goods and services, absolutely. What do you think the primary means of making money was 200 years ago? Trapping. Fur trading and trapping, that's absolutely right. If you had some type of little makeshift trading post or a little mercantile business, after a community become more developed, you can make a few dollars that way. But fur trading and trapping was the primary means of making a living here on the frontier. All right, come on. There we go. In one of his letters dating 1848, he told his parents, "I'm a backwoodsman and would rather wear a buckskin shirt and leather breeches than a ruffled shirt and silk stockings." E.B. associated the frontier lifestyle with independence. He did, and he befriended Jacob Wolf and other old-timers in the area. He learned how to trap, learned how to trade, learned how to sell his furs. He made some pretty good money at that. He had an upstart mercantile business, a trading post, and then later on it developed into a regular mercantile business, and he did quite well. He worked as a clerk in a town on the East Coast, and he hated it. He referred to it in one of his letters. He felt like he was an industrial slave, and he was moving west. Go west, young man, was his attitude, and he came out here, and he was able to buy a horse, He was able to get goods off of the keel boats or flat boats on the river. Jacob Wolf helped him out quite a bit. Of course, he had a vested interest in knowing Jacob. Jacob had several daughters, okay? So he made a go of it, okay? Freedom. Freedom on the frontier. You were not likely have to worry about your demise coming about from another man. It was surviving the elements. It was surviving the weather. It was surviving, snakes and those type of things. Not having enough food. So you better learn how to hunt and provide for yourself, and he did. The Civil War raged throughout the country from 1861 to 1865. The Ozarks were an area where there were a lot of guerrilla warfare going on. Border wars between Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas. The fighting here was a little bit different. And it affected homes and families like it did anywhere else in the United States at the time. And the Wolf family was no different. The majority of the Wolf family men fought for the Confederacy. The Wolf family supported the Southern cause. Most of the Wolf boys went off to fight for the Confederacy, not only locally, but in campaigns farther east as well. It affected the whole family. Sometimes the men didn't come home, and when they did come home, sometimes they didn't have a home to come to. We know of one incident that's been recorded happening in and around the Wolf house, and that was when General Samuel R. Curtis of the Union Army, best known for leading the Federal Army to victory at Pea Ridge, was camped at Salem in Fulton County of April of 1862, and he issued orders to destroy mills, ferries, and other means of support for the area residents. Jacob also owned and operated 2 ferries on the White River. They were in a brief skirmish with Confederate forces. They took command of the ferries, and then they also ransacked the Wolf house, took everything in the Wolf house they could possibly use for themselves, including the firearms. Now keep in mind, Jacob was 77 years old by the time this happened. All right, and he was a Southern sympathizer. He didn't take kindly to Curtis's boys coming down the river and ransacking his house. He took his cane and tried to fight him off with his cane. And for that, they imprisoned him in Batesville. This was the beginning of the end for Jacob. His health never recovered from that experience. Jacob Wolf is believed to have died in January of 1863. He left behind 16 children and many grandchildren. And then the Civil War raged on throughout the country, and family never recovered to its once known prosperity and liberty. So during Jacob's time, he had a trading post. He was a master blacksmith. He was a businessman, a store owner. He was a representative of the territorial legislature. He and his family owned 400 acres of land down in the river bottoms. He harvested his crops and sent them to markets as far away as New Orleans. He also owned upwards by 1815, 15 slaves. Okay? He taught the male slaves to be master blacksmith and master log builder. So if you and your family are coming up the White River and you decide to stay over for a few days or a few weeks, you can incorporate his guys' help to go out and build you a log cabin. Okay? A lot of folks did that. Now you need a good stonemason. How much do you think a good stone chimney would cost you back 200 years ago? You got to have one. Now you could have built a mud chimney with wood and things of that nature. They didn't last as long. Stone chimney, that was as best as you could get. $30. $30 200 years ago would be several $1,000s today. Okay? The last family descendant that lived in the house with Jacob's grandson, Jacob Hedrick Wolf, from approximately 1910 to 1917. This is him and his family and his little boy. You can see roof repairs taking place here. Okay? Jacob's grandson in 1915 was giving an interview to a local paper. And he brought with him a map that he hand-drawn. showing where all of the outbuildings were at the historic site where he grew up as a kid. This is the only remaining structure. However, the east side, which is this side here, you can see the turkey feathering shingles up there, so that's the windward side, that's the west side. The east side, you didn't have kitchens in the home back in those days, so the detached kitchen was on the east side. The cook shack was on the east side. If you're there in the parking lot where the entrance sign is, and then the annex buildings over here to the right, that corner back in there is where the slaves' quarters were, and where the annex building is sitting, where they've held community functions in the past. That's where the barns and stables were, okay? 1999 to 2002, through a courthouse grant, restoration was able to be conducted with the Jacob Wolf House. About 30% of the timbers were in a bad state of repair or needed to be replaced. This project took 3 years, and the reason it took 3 years is they did it right. They historically conserved and restored the structure and did the work there just like they would have done it 200 years ago, okay? A part of that restoration process was archaeological investigation. They took that hand-drawn map from Jacob's grandson, and they were able to pinpoint exactly where every one of those outbuildings were. So we not only have a really good historical record in place, but we also have an archaeological record in place, and it's recognized as a state archaeological site, okay? With that becomes a great deal of responsibility with the resource. So we have a structure here that's the oldest public structure in Arkansas, and we have a wealth of knowledge available to us as we get ready in the next couple of years to write an interpretive plan in which to tell the stories that we're going to tell there. The future of the past. In March of this year, the Department of Arkansas Heritage acquired the property from Baxter County Quorum Court. And over the next 2 to 3 years, we have many site improvements planned to include either the renovation of the annex building to be our administrative offices and welcome center or small visitor center. The footprint there is about 1,250 square feet. Now it's in a bad state of repair. I mean, it's going to take a considerable investment if we decide to use that structure to renovate it. That's one plan we're looking at. There's nothing definitive yet. We're in the planning stage. The other idea is to possibly see what the investment would cost us to build a new structure, a new facility. Okay, so we're taking a look at both angles. What's going to be the best investment for the agency? What's going to be the best investment to serve the public? Okay. New restoration work to the historic structures, the Jacob Wolf House, the John Wolf Cabin, okay? Outdoor exhibitry, indoor exhibitry, inserting period replica furniture in the territorial courthouse to represent what it would have looked like from 1829 to 1835, okay? And that's our focus of this structure here. The territorial courthouse that's our primary focus with interpretation with that structure, okay? We're also going to provide first-time public programming, living history. If you walk up someday and I'm wearing buckskins, okay, and I've reverted back into my Jeremiah Johnson mindset, it doesn't take much. We're going to be providing living history programs, what a day in the life on the frontier would have been like. We'll be giving you tours of the territorial courthouse, the John Wolf Cabin, so forth and so on. So there's the annex building as it stands today. Okay, it's going to take a considerable investment. Here's the west side of the territorial courthouse. There's the John Wolf Cabin. Now, John Wolf was Jacob's brother. His cabin actually was farther down the White River. near Calico Rock. It was moved up here in the 90s to complement the story and the architecture of the Wolf House. The boardwalk takes you out to have a kind of panoramic view of the river valley and get a different perspective of the historic site. This is about a half-scale exhibit over at Davidsonville Historic State Park near Pocahontas. This is a flatboat, okay? It depends on where we are going to be able to insert this type of exhibitry. If we do an outdoor exhibit, I would like to see a full-scale replica of a flatboat or a keelboat built on the site, and it to be representative of a boat being in dry dock. It'll be interactive, and you can't tell the story of the site without telling the story of the river, okay? The two were synonymous. If we're able to build a new visitor center, then this would be a major exhibit at a much smaller scale, obviously, inside the visitor center. We'll just have to see how that works out. And then public programming. Here is an example of living history. A couple of guys in their buckskins so a lot of different public programming ideas we're going to be identifying. So the proposed Welcome Center, this is the inside of the brand new visitor center at Davidsonville Historic State Park. A welcome desk area. An exhibit area with actual artifacts that were found in the town of Davidsonville from 1815 to 1830. We have a collection of thousands of artifacts that have been found at the Jacob Wolf House Historic Site. They are in safekeeping at the Collections Management Facility with the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, the agency who surveys and investigates these type of cultural resources throughout all of our state properties. And when I say thousands of artifacts, that's anything from the size of my thumbnail, okay, to finding a Bowie knife, if you will. So we have a wonderful collection that we can choose from, exhibit it in a similar fashion to tell you the story of the artifacts. One of the new interpretive methods today, whether it be a natural site, a cultural site, or a historical site, is 3D imaging. The University of Arkansas Center for Spatial Technology, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Goes out to a site, often where they have done archaeological investigations, and from studying the actual artifacts, which you get to see in 3D mode, okay, this is a big screen, okay, like a LD screen inside the visitor center, and you get to negotiate your journey. You're on this 3D virtual reality journey through the town of Davidsonville. I would like to see something. I've already visited with those folks. I was the park superintendent at Davidsonville from 2000 to 2004 and brought back the archaeological investigations after a 25-year hiatus. And this is one of the end products that is in the new visitor center there now. It's a wonderful tool to learn about history of the site, the artifacts, what it looked like. You can take a bird's eye view, a top-down view, a side view. It's really cool. And the Arkansas Archaeological Survey and the folks at the UCAS team helped produce this type of product. I visited with them several weeks ago when I was in Little Rock, and they're on board. They would like to help us with that when we get ready to engage our interpretive plan. And then, of course, we have plans for a part of the Welcome Center to be a small resale area, okay? Selling resale items that would be thematic in nature. They would represent something from the historical side. I've identified in part of my job in working as a manager and a historian of this wonderful resource is doing an extensive amount of research. It's what we do. We're weirdos. We enjoy doing a lot of writing and doing a lot of research and then interpreting that to the folks. So I identified 7 major interpretive themes that best represents the property. If we were just going to interpret the territorial courthouse, and that's all that we had there, that's all that ever existed, that's all that ever transpired, that's the only story that we knew to interpret, then we would just simply focus on 1829 to 1835. But there's not. There is a wonderful array of stories. So we're taking a holistic approach to our management and our interpretation. Early Arkansas frontier, okay? Roughly from the 1760s, 70s, up through just before statehood, 1836, okay? So the early Arkansas frontier. Life on the frontier, a day in the life on the frontier, things that happen in and around Liberty, things that happen in the Ozark region, things that happen in Arkansas, what was going on in other parts of the country, it all ties together. Native American culture. The Cherokee, the Shawnee, the Delaware were there on the west banks of the White River until 1829. In 1829, they were moved. Part of the Indian removal process. Jacksonian's Indian removal period was roughly from 1829 to 1841. Okay, they were forced to move to what is today Oklahoma, Indian Territory, and set up their new nations there. Well, what did that do? What happens when all of a sudden thousands of acres of land, which was under the ownership of the Cherokee, with the Shawnee and factions of the Shawnee and Delaware living there, all of a sudden they're moved out. What does that do to an area? Anybody?
It's been a land rush.
A land rush. That's exactly right. Where are you going? I don't know, but I'm leaving Virginia. I hear there's a place on the White River in Arkansas that's just opened up. They finally moved those doggone Indians out of there, and we're going to go state claim to land. You coming? Okay? I mean, it was that simple. And, you know, I've studied the 5 civilized tribes and the Trail of Tears in the Indian removal period. It's one of my other eras of history that I've enjoyed studying. It's black and white. The U.S. government never honored one treaty, not one, with the Native Americans, okay? This opened it up. Manifest destiny. White settlers got to come in, and that's what it was all about. White settlers coming in, staking a claim, and starting anew, okay? That's how things were done, and so we're going to talk about Native American culture, the Cherokee, the Shawnee, the Delaware. Now the Ozarks, in the bigger picture, was the Osage hunting grounds. They were primarily in southern Missouri, but they came down into northern Arkansas to hunt and move their camps seasonally through the Ozarks. White River, the lakes, whatever. And they dominated the fur trade in the Ozarks. You had to deal with those folks if you're going to be involved in the fur trade, all right? The Trail of Tears, the northern route came right through what is present-day Norfork, okay? It was the Binge detachment, John Binge. And that was in 1838, 1839, and primarily was part of the Cherokee removal. I've done an extensive amount of research in this area about the Binge detachment and coming through what would have been Liberty. I've worked with the National Park Service extensively over the last 30 days out of their Santa Fe office, their National Trails office in Santa Fe. And we have a lot of good history on what happened here with that detachment. The thing that sealed the deal with Trail of Tears certification at the site was a colleague of mine in our Little Rock office sent me a scanned copy of the original 1830s map that we have in our archives that shows the Binge detachment coming through Liberty, okay? We also have oral histories that's been passed down that Jacob Wolf helped repair carriages and wagons from the Bench detachment at Liberty. So, providing all of this information, all of this research, all this evidence to the National Park Service in Santa Fe, and they're more than willing to help us on those exhibits in the interpretation. Once we get the exhibits in place, they will certify us as a Trail of Tears historic site and a Trail of Tears interpretive facility. Now, that just gives us a more heightened level of exposure. That's not going to distract or take away from these other areas of interpretive importance. Simply adds to it. River travel and trade. If you were coming into the country, if you weren't on horseback, you rode a keel boat or a flatboat up the White River. That's how you got here. You could have walked. It would have been a heck of a walk. I'm not saying that folks didn't do that. But river travel and trade was the artery that brought you into this country, the Central Highlands of the Ozarks. And your goods, your services, any furniture you might have, and dropped you off right there at the juncture of the Norfork and White River. And that was one location that thousands of people came through at the Territorial Courthouse, Jacob Wolf House. So we're going to be interpreting that story. Territorial politics. Carter's Territorial Papers. 3 different volumes describing Arkansas's territorial politics and how things worked in that the mechanics of territorial politics leading up to early statehood is a wonderful, wonderful research source in which I've used. So obviously that's a story we're going to be telling. We're using the Jacob Wolf House, the Territorial Courthouse, as our backdrop for that story. Early statehood. Arkansas became a state, as you know, in 1836, so we're going to be talking about how did territorial politics play into the beginning of early statehood. And what was the population? What was the social and cultural dynamics of the state? And how did it build and move and forward and so forth and so on. One of the stories that you might not expect is slavery in the Ozarks. We all know about the institution of slavery in the South, the Southeast, the Eastern Seaboard, okay? Little is known about slavery in the Ozarks. By the time that Jacob Wolf was there, like I said earlier, he was pro-Southern cause. He was a very wealthy man. Today's standards, he would have been a multimillionaire with all of his business endeavors and all that he was involved in. His land alone today would be worth close to $1 million. He owned 15 slaves. We know that for a fact. We have documented archaeologically where those slave quarters are at the historic site. So how was the slavery issue different in the Ozarks than, say, down in southeastern Arkansas in the Delta, or Alabama, or Georgia, or any other place, okay? So we're going to be telling that story. And then the war between the states. How did the Civil War affect people here in the Ozarks? We have archaeological evidence of Civil War encampments on the east side of the Wolf House, okay? So these are the 7 primary interpretive themes that we're going to engage to tell the whole story at the Jacob Wolf House Historic Site. And our time period that we're going to represent there to include these 7 areas of interpretation, 1829, when the Wolf House was built. Now there's been speculation over the years exactly what were the dates. Okay, the entrance sign that was carved by Junior Cobb says 1816 to 1828. Okay, when that was done, that's what they believed. Finally, during the restoration process from 1999 to 2002, a professor from the University of Arkansas came over and did what is called a dendrochronology test. Big, nice, fancy word for him boring into, I think it was around 30 timbers, and dating those wood fibers. The earliest timber was cut and cured in 1825. The oldest timber was 1828. It takes 6 months to a year for timbers of that size, pine, to cure. All right? So we know that with pretty doggone certainty that the structure was built in 1829. Jacob Wolf, the grand architect of all this, died in January of 1863. Our story ends there. We're going to interpret and manage this resource from 1829 to 1863. Trail of Tears certification. You have 3 different areas that you can be certified as a site. You have to be on or near a major significant trail segment. Your site has to have a heightened level of historical importance. And your facility has to be able to interpret that story from that area. The National Park Service staff has told me once we get these things in place, which they're going to play a role in, they will designate us as a Trail of Tears historic site and a Trail of Tears interpretive facility. Okay, like I said, it's not going to distract or take away from our other interpretive themes. It's simply going to add to it. So if anybody's interested or has access, maybe the Historical Society themselves with structures or properties, as this trail meandered through northern Arkansas, the property must be non-federally owned and managed. Property must have direct and significant historical and or thematic associations with the National Historic Trail. The property must be made available to some degree for public interpretation and appreciation. It must have accessibility requirements, ADA. The person or organization requesting certification must be the legal owner of the property or have permission to do so. Okay? Outdoor exhibitry. This is an example of the Davidsonville Historic State Park sign. It's a carved sign, and it's interpretive in nature. You have the seal of the Lawrence County, and then you have the town plot, okay, of Davidsonville itself. That gives the visitor, when you drive in, a little bit of insight to what the primary focus of the park's interpretive facilities are going to be about. We could go with a similar design that would best fit the Jacob Wolf House historic site, or we could go with a design that's a little bit more modern. We're not quite sure. New outdoor exhibitry, wayside exhibit panels, the ones there, the interpretation's good interpretation. The outside of the signs, the plexiglass type material is scratched really, really bad. It needs to be replaced. We're going to add new wayside exhibit signs interpreting some of the areas that is not interpreted there right now. And then a couple of new signs will dedicate themselves to the Trail of Tears as well. This is a replica, 38-foot long, 12-foot wide, 5-foot deep keelboat. I'm pushing really hard to have a replica keelboat or flatboat built either on the site or on a much smaller scale to be a part of our exhibitry in the Welcome Center. You've got to tell the story of river travel and trade. Lifeways, okay? What did we eat? How did we live? Want to have a historic garden? You can get historic seeds from 200 years ago, okay? They're available. You don't go buy them at Walmart, okay? There are folks who specialize in, I never get this right, archaeobotany, something to that effect. Seeds that's been frozen or preserved in Williamsburg. I don't know if any of you have visited Williamsburg in the Northeast, Colonial Williamsburg. They have historic gardens. We want to do something like that. And then one of our programs, you come out on a Saturday as an example. We're there with our Dutch ovens, and we're making you a frontier meal, okay? A little taste test, all right? Public programming. The John Wolf Cabin, I want to turn that into a children learning center. So I want to get the young folks involved, okay? And have some interactive things going on in there so they can learn about the history and heritage, not only of what happened there, but of the Ozarks, okay? Living history, that's a wonderful venue to use at a site like this. River travel and trade. Native American culture, okay? Story that's got to be told. Territorial politics. Maybe do some reenactments upstairs. We can hold about 30 to 40 people in there. We did that over Pioneer Days and convicted this little 7-year-old boy of horse stealing. Scared the bejesus out of him. Trail of Tears. It's documented, folks. They come right through there, okay? Slavery in the Ozarks. And the war between the states. If you were for the Confederacy, that's what you called it. If you were a Union sympathizer, it was the Civil War. The archaeological record tells us a great deal at what's at a site. And we're extremely fortunate that Dr. Robert Lafferty and Dr. Phyllis Spears, two well-known historians and archaeologists, were able to be a part of the consulting team during the restoration process. And we have prehistoric Native American culture documented there, going all the way back to the Paleo time period, 12,000 years ago. We have Civil War history documented there. We have frontier history documented there. We have the outbuildings that was all there during the peak of when Jacob Wolf lived there and documented archaeologically. Those artifacts are preserved and protected, like I said earlier, in Fayetteville. So, archaeology is the study of historic and prehistoric people through their tools, artwork, and other artifacts and places that were made or modified by human activity. Archaeologists then learn about the past cultural practices and historic events. Important knowledge is gained about past people, places, things, and situations that helps us better understand and appreciate our history and our heritage. So, through the archaeological record, that only enhances or will enhance our knowledge and the visitor's experience and add to the historical documents that are in place as well. In 2004, the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, from 2000 to 2004, they were at Davidsonville, okay? I keep using Davidsonville as an example with this program because they interpret the early crossover time period of when all these things were going on at the Wolf property. And they are a perfect example. They're one of the most pristine early American frontier sites that exist out there. I was there that day when they unearthed the brick foundation of the first courthouse in Arkansas at the Davidsonville site. I stepped out on that and I was the first person to land on those bricks in 200 years. Just puts goosebumps on your arm, doesn't it? I mean, I'm one of those weirdo history guys, so it did something for me, that's all I can say. What did they find there that gives us insight to our society, our culture? These artifacts were found out back behind where the tavern was, all right? Mouth heart, pieces of 8, Spanish pieces of 8, and dice, okay? So they're there at the grog having a few cold ones and playing music and throwing some dice and who knows what else was going on. But this was found in a midden, okay, a trash heap, if you will, just a few feet under the ground at Davidsonville. These type of artifacts at different locations at the cultural site, the historical site, gives us the ability to study and research those and interpret what happened there, okay? You combine the archaeological record with the historical record and you get a pretty good idea of what existed and what happened there. Come on, there we go. And folks, it's the law. It's serious business. Arkansas Code 13-6306, it's unlawful to disturb or excavate artifacts on a state archaeological site. I would like to think, and maybe it's wishful thinking sometimes, I've managed a lot of cultural and historical sites, and been a part of these archaeological excavations and surveys. You got folks out there who like to capitalize off of artifacts regardless of their location and sell them on the black market, okay? Among many other things, they're thieves. They steal from the historical record. They often destroy the historical record, okay? Archaeologists and historians are interested in one thing, and that's learning about our past and interpreting that to future generations so we can preserve and promote of who we were, what we did to get where we're at, and use that as a record to learn from about where we're going to go. Okay? So, don't come see me and be carrying a metal detector. Not good. Don't go there. Don't do it. Okay? I promise I'll try to put you in jail. All right, we're almost through here. It's the oldest public structure in Arkansas. I've been working with the planner of the resource study that was done at the Wolf House in 2013. Her name's Natalie Franz. She's out of the Midwest Regional Office in Colorado. And I've got a copy of that resource study. And prior to Department of Arkansas Heritage getting in the picture, the good folks out there, and I genuinely mean that, was trying to figure out a way to preserve and protect the Jacob Wolf House and the property. Resources and money and funding not being very available at the county level. So the National Park Service was engaged, and hey, Mr. Richard Shedd was one of the people at the forefront of this. And long story short, they did an extensive resource study. They wanted to see if it could become, if it met the criteria to become a new National Park Service unit. And it did not. And the reason is not because of the significance of the Wolf House, but because of the cultural landscape that surrounded the Wolf House 200 years ago not being there anymore. Okay, there's too much development, too much has changed. So you go visit your favorite national park, especially if it's a historical park, and you look at these structures and facilities that's been preserved and protected, and they are part of a National Historic Landmark designation. That cultural landscape still exists there for the most part. It didn't in this case. However, not all is lost. Notably, it is the only surviving example with at least moderate historic integrity constructed for a civic purpose. The others were private homes or early stagecoach and taverns. In layman's terms, that's simply saying that the Jacob Wolf House historic site is the last remaining two-story dog trot public structure. It was built to be a territorial courthouse that exists in the United States. It's the last remaining one. Okay? There's many of those type of structures that still is scattered among the cultural landscape out there, but they were built and used as homes or taverns or inns. The Jacob Wolf House is the last remaining two-story dog trot public structure in the United States. It's that simple. Okay? It's a most worthy destination to protect and promote and preserve and move forward, and that's exactly what we're going to try to do. All right? There you go. A wonderful example of early Arkansas frontier architecture. It stands the test of time, and I'm looking most forward to being at ground zero and working with a lot of different folks and helping move the site forward with new development, new restoration, first-time public programming, new exhibitry. It ought to be a heck of a ride, huh? So, hope you come out and see us. Come out and as we're moving along and you're wanting to see what we're doing and what's going on, tell us about it. We'll be glad to do that. Right now, well, after July 1, We've hired an architect, and we were fortunate that the same architect who oversaw the initial restoration work, 99 to 2002, Tommy Jameson Architects out of Little Rock, who specializes in these type of structures, was awarded the bid. Worked with Tommy when I was with State Parks. I'm going to get the chance to work with him again. So he knows what he's doing, and the folks that works for him knows what they're doing. Next 2 to 3 years, we're going to be heavily involved doing all the things that I've talked about this evening. Right now, I have a little tiny, and I mean tiny, metal office building, a little mobile metal office building. Walked out up the other day to give some folks a tour, and they said, I thought that was a storage building. You scared me to death. You come walking out. We do have signage on there, okay? But that's where my temporary administrative office is, and that way, work at the site, including the annex building, if we decide to go down that road, it'll all go uninterrupted, okay? So I'm there Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30, and I give tours of the property and of the site, the structure, territorial courthouse up on request, or I'll come out there and meet and greet you if I'm not involved in doing a half a dozen other things. And so now the site's open 7 days a week, okay? The historic site's open from 8 a.m. to sunset. So, you know, what is sunset? Well, sunset in the summer is about this time right now, okay, 8:30, 7:30, 8 o'clock. And then in the winter, it gets probably around, 4:30 or 5. So if you want to visit the site on the weekends or after hours, you're more than welcome to. You just have to be vacated by sunset. I'm the only staff member, okay? I'm the head cook and bottle washer. And so I'm the site manager and the resource manager. I'm the interpreter, I'm the historian, I'm the administrator, I'm all those wonderful things. We don't have plans for any other full-time positions in the immediate future. I did get approval to have a seasonal interpreter's position, 6 months, March through September. And that will probably start maybe next year. And interpreter is a fancy description for someone who is going to specialize in public programming, help me with public programming. Also managing the site, but their primary duties will be public programming. Probably will seek out assistance from ASU Mountain Home with students involved in the public history or history program, and that would be a good position for our young folks here to get their feet wet, see if they want to have a career in state government at a site like this and do public programming. That's one idea I'm toying around with. Part of our development is going to have an enhanced security system, okay, and a fire alarm system. I'm building a lot of bridges right now with folks in several of the communities around here, and so I'm in good, if you will, with Baxter County Sheriff's Department and the Highway Patrol and the good folks at Norfork, and so they're helping me keep an eye on things, and so far so good. We've had some minor vandalism at the site, things like that, but overall I get the sense that the community and the folks in the area, as I think they have done. There's a reason that place is there for 200 years. That place should not be there. I'm just telling you, that should not be there. It was a common practice during the Civil War after a site was occupied so nobody else could use it for the war effort. They'd burn it to the ground. Jacob took his cane and tried to beat him off. I'm surprised they didn't torch that thing as soon as they sent him to Batesville. So there's a grander scheme of things going on here, all right? That place was meant to be there, and we're going to do our darndest to make something of it. So there's a great deal of community pride and people taking ownership, and that's a good thing. that's a good thing. And I look forward to working with everyone. So come out and see us. And now there's times I got to be off the property, so if I'm not there, feel free to look around. But we're really happy to have this opportunity available to us, and we look forward to serving the communities here in Baxter County. And once we get completely developed, I think we're going to have a nice product. Whatever that product's going to end up to be, it'll be something we can be proud of. So I greatly appreciate David and Jennifer inviting me here tonight to share this with you. And thank you for coming out. I appreciate it. Thank you. Anybody have any questions or comments? I'll try to do my best to answer a few. Yes, sir.
One quick question. You kept referring to Izard County early in the development. At what point did this become Baxter County?
1873.
Yeah, I was going to say 1870s, 1880s.
In
1873.
1873, they divided the Izard
Okay.
County and created the general area, Baxter, Izard, Stone, Searcy, all in there. Stone County was created at the same time.
Yes.
Where are the wolves here?
Well, nobody knows where Jacob's buried. If you do, let me know.
I can take you to it.
Well,
It's in a.
the gatekeeper to knowledge over here.
It's in a little area down Red's Lane.
Now, the Wolf family cemetery is down the road that she just referred to.
I didn't hear what he was. Down Red's Lane.
Red's Landing. Do you know where PJ's restaurant is down there? Okay. As soon as you cross the railroad track, there's a private home, and the Wolf family cemetery is on that gentleman's property. However, they're the more or less unofficial caretakers of the cemetery, and I've been down there on a couple of different occasions, documenting with photographs and making notes. And there's a lot of Wolf family there. There's a lot of Adams family. The Wolf and Adams were intermarried, and some other families that were buried there. The reason I said we don't know where Jacob Wolf is buried is we've seen no evidence to document a grave site that says Jacob Wolf. Now here's one of the problems you get into in reading and interpreting the past from 200 years ago. The Wolf family is a perfect example. You know how many Jacob Wolfs there were?
There's military records that, if I can find them, what happened is when he was released from Batesville, he got quite sick and he ended up dying.
Yeah.
Well, it was against the law to bury Southerners during the Civil War, and because he had been arrested, they buried him secretly in the night at the cemetery.
At the Wolf family cemetery? Okay.
Because
And there are a lot of unmarked.
they were afraid that they would come and dig him up.
Yeah.
Which is what they did.
There are a lot of
There are a lot of
unmarked graves, headstones down there at the Wolf family cemetery.
Well, there's some Confederate records. I was able to go through the records of Colonel Thomas Rowe Freeman, and some of his men helped bury him.
Okay. Frida is a local historian down around Mountain View, and she's done a lot of work on this area. Yes?
Well, why was it there? I mean, that's a long ways from where he was living.
Isn't that closer to where John's cabin
That's
was?
closer to where his brother lived, farther down south on the White River.
And it was John's
The Wolf family cemetery from the historical side, and in that river valley down
Wasn't
there.
that far.
There were,
By river, it wasn't that
by
far.
river wasn't very far, and there were other family members, Adam and Wolf family members, that lived in that river valley. And so the Wolf family cemetery was located there. There's graves that go back to the late 1700s down there.
Is that part of where the 400 acres is?
His 400 acres were in that river valley. I cannot tell you today this is where his 400 acres were, but we know it was in close proximity to the Wolf house, and it was down in the river valley. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a family tree, Jacob Wolf?
I do. I can produce it for anybody that would like a copy of it.
There are several versions.
There's one of the wonderful reports, very comprehensive reports, that was provided as a part of this restoration process called the Historic Structures Report for the Jacob Wolf House. Okay? It's a volume about that thick. A part of this process, Jane Gould, a well-known Arkansas historian, wrote a comprehensive history of the Wolf family. And within that report, I have a great deal of insight to who was who, and who married who, and so forth and so on. One of the points I was going to get to a while ago was that Jacob Wolf, great-great-grandfather, Major Jacob Wolf, sons named Jacob Wolf, grandsons named Jacob Hedrick Wolf was the last one that lived there. So some of them were overlapped in time, obviously, okay? So they didn't take time back in the day to say, this is Jacob Wolf such and such. So when you're historically researching these documents, okay, reading these historical narratives, it's really hard. I had to go back and read it 3 or 4 times. It's really hard to decipher which Jacob they're talking about. So there's some confusion there. But there is a timeline of those families, and I have a copy of that. Yeah, David?
Just a couple minutes.
Yeah,
Finish
sure,
up.
right, exactly.
Yeah, because they close the
Yes.
library.
With everything you want to do, how many acres do you have? Do you have enough room to do all this?
We're lucky in one sense that the center of all activity is on the 2 acres that we have left. The Jacob Wolf House, the annex building. We don't know for sure if we're going to, we're doing a bit of a feasibility study, okay? We're getting ready to start into a design phase, architectural design phase. Is it going to be feasible for us and practical for us to invest in this structure here, the old annex building, which was built in the late 70s? Or do we go with a new footprint? We don't know yet, okay? Wayside exhibit panels will be continued around the property. Other exhibits are going to be inside this structure or another structure, and then the outdoor exhibit, the primary outdoor exhibit that I'm pushing hard for is the keel boat or the flat boat, okay? So yeah, we will have room for that, okay? We're not going to box ourselves in, okay? You can overdevelop a property. I've seen that, okay? I've done case studies and I've seen where what could have been a simple, wonderful interpretation of a cultural or natural or historical site was just overdone, okay? So we're going to keep it simple and offer a good product, and there's going to be setbacks, there's going to be obstacles, there's going to be things that we don't know yet, but when we get through, it's going to be a wonderful end product. I've been involved in many of these development type programs, these plans, and but what's a good end product without a few challenges, right? So all good things come about in due time. All right, I know I got to wrap it up. Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, listen, yes, ma'am.
Where is the Davidson State Park that you referred to located?
Davidsonville Historic State Park. It's a wonderful, wonderful representation of early Arkansas frontier. First courthouse, first land office, first post office was at Davidsonville, which was Lawrence County. Take 62-412 over to 63 at Ash Flat. You can get on 63 north of Ash Flat. And then take it all the way to Black Rock, Arkansas. And then go north. There'll be signs there, those brown conservation signs, state park signs. And it's 10 minutes off the highway. And it's they got campgrounds over there. They got a brand new visitor center. They've got wonderful exhibits down in the town site, picnic area, fishing lake. It's trail systems. It's a great place to go visit. So you get a chance, go over there and see what they're all about.
I've got one other question.
Yeah.
When was Davidson, I read where
that big park where it was, the old Davidson was abandoned in 1830 because of.
Thank you, Marlon, that was really great.
Well, it was abandoned in 1830. The Southwest
About 10
Trail,
minutes to enjoy
Southwest
some
Trail
refreshments
rerouted
that my
around.
sister prepared over here. And